Welcome to BBC News, broadcasting to viewers in North America and around the globe. I'm Duncan Golostani. Our top stories. President Trump says a Republican memo alleging the FBI abused its surveillance powers shows the agency is biased against him.
I think it's a disgrace what's happening in our country. And when you look at that, and you see that, and so many other things, what's going on, a lot of people should be ashamed of themselves.
Anger in court. The father of 3 girls abused by the doctor of the American gymnastics team is held back during the sentencing hearing. Abandoned in a mountain blizzard, how 1 Syrian refugee survived after being left for dead by smugglers. And a unique view of polar bears struggling to find enough food to stay alive on the shrinking Arctic ice. Hello, welcome to the programme. After weeks of fevered speculation, a Republican memo has been released alleging political bias in the US Justice Department and FBI. It was cleared by President Trump in spite of strong opposition from Democrats and many in the intelligence community who say it misrepresents highly sensitive information. Nick Bright reports now from Washington.
Feeling of deja vu, with the day beginning, as it often does, with an attack from the White House on the Russian investigation. But this has intensified the big chill between the president and his senior law enforcement officials. The top leadership and investigators of the FBI and the Justice Department have politicized the sacred investigative process in favor of Democrats and against Republicans, something which would have been unthinkable just a short time ago. That's the main accusation of a secret Republican memo, which the president authorized the public release of. It alleges an anti-Trump bias amongst top law enforcement officials.
I think it's a disgrace what's happening in our country. And when you look at that, and you see that, and so many other things, what's going on, a lot of people should be ashamed of themselves, and much worse than that.
The memo, commissioned by a Republican congressman, accuses the FBI of using a politically biased source while seeking surveillance warrants against the Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. It alleges the request to the court relied on a much-disputed Trump dossier compiled by former British intelligence agent Christopher Steele, who it says was anti-Trump and funded in part by the Hillary Clinton campaign. But is this a partisan Republican stunt to discredit the FBI and, by extension, the investigation of the special counsel into possible Russian collusion with the Trump campaign? There's been no public response from the FBI, but it fiercely resisted the release of this memo, having expressed grave concerns about its accuracy. It's also been slammed by senior Democrats.
The fact that the President of the United States will blithely disregard the admonitions of both his own FBI director and the Department of Justice tells you all you need to know about where the President's priorities are. And it's not protecting classified information. It's not respecting the hard-working men and women at the FBI. It's whatever the president deems to be in his short-term political interest.
What we've seen underscores how the Russian investigation is increasingly becoming the subject of a toxic and vicious fight, not just between the political parties in Washington, but between branches of the US government in Washington. Vladimir Putin must be rubbing his hands in delight.
Is the memo done, sir? Is it done?
Donald Trump looked pretty happy too. His supporters will believe he's struck a blow for justice. His critics will argue he's engineered a political stunt. Nick Bright, BBC News, Washington.
Earlier I spoke with former CIA analyst and now adjunct professor at New York's University Center for Global Affairs, Yael Eisenstadt. I began by asking if she thought President Trump's allegation that the FBI is biased against him is in fact supported by what's in the memo.
Actually, I think if anything, the memo proves the opposite. It is so cherry-picked from things that we actually already know. We already know that the investigation was launched because of the conversation with the Australians that Papadopoulos had, and yet this memo is trying to build this whole case against Steele. So if anything, I think it really proves the opposite. But I think the most interesting thing is, if the allegations that the president is trying to put forth that the FBI is biased well, then why didn't the FBI put this information out before the election? The FBI had been investigating these allegations against Page and others before the election even happened, and they didn't make any word public of any of these allegations until the investigation continued on into January when the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, put out their memo. So I just think it's interesting. If really the FBI had been out to get Donald Trump, they could have put this information out in public eye before we even went to the voting booth.
Yes, many people are jumping on the timeline, are they? You use interesting wording there, which is cherry picking. Put this into context for us with your knowledge of the intelligence community. Is intelligence normally treated in such a partisan way as it has been in the last few hours?
I mean, I personally have never seen this happen before. In general, even though parties disagree and they have different policy options, when it comes to protecting classified information, protecting national security, those are the types of things that usually do not fall into such partisan showmanship and partisan football like this has been. So I've never seen anything like this myself. And I used to coordinate the President's Daily Brief. I used to also work on FISA warrants and requests and all of these things. And I have never, I mean, from the inside, from when I was in the CIA, I never, ever saw anything like this happening. So the idea that this is not a complete political stunt is just absolutely unfathomable for me.
What do you think are the political ramifications for those intelligence organizations being dragged into the mud like this?
Well, I mean, I know the men and women inside of these agencies continue to put their head down and do their work, and I know they will continue to do so. I mean, of course, I'm concerned about morale, because these are people who can't stand up and defend themselves, and they can't in any way say what's accurate, what's not accurate. And if you have the American people using their agencies for political means like this, of course it's going to be demoralizing. And even more importantly for me, it could perhaps affect even the potential to recruit further CIA and FBI and other government agency employees in the future. So I do think it's a really unfortunate situation for our agencies, but I also have faith that the men and women in those institutions, they continue to serve the Constitution, to serve the American people, and they will continue to do what they're doing.
Professor Gail Eisenstadt. The father of 3 victims of the disgraced US gymnastics team, Dr. Larry Nassar, has apologized for trying to attack him during his final sentencing hearing. The court had been hearing from 150 women sexually abused by Nassar. Randall Margraves told the court he had lost control when 2 of his daughters finished their victim statements. Neda Tawfiq reports.
That a girl who had Larry Nassar as her doctor.
Another family stands, like so many before them, to confront the disgraced doctor. All 3 of the Margraves children were sexually assaulted by Larry Nassar. At this final sentencing hearing, 2 of them, Lauren and Madison, speak of their grief and their parents' guilt.
I see the look in their faces, and I know they want to be able to do something, but they can't. And the guilt they have will never go away. And all this is because of you.
To my parents, thank you for all your love and support through all of this. You have done everything that a parent could ever do. I love you.
Randall Margraves then asked permission as a distraught father to speak.
Go ahead, sir.
You saw the...
No, we don't want to swear. We don't want to have profanity.
The courtroom at first chuckles as he requests time alone with Nassar.
I would ask you to, as part of this sentencing, to grant me 5 minutes in a locked room with this demon.
I have
Would
a feeling...
you do that?
That is not how
Yes
our...
No?
No, sir, I can't do that.
Would you give me 1 minute?
You know that I can't do that. That's not how our legal system...
Well, I'm going to have to
There have been numerous powerful moments throughout Nassar's sentencing hearings, but this one father's reaction shows so clearly how raw emotions are.
What if this happened to you guys?
When the court resumes, the judge shows compassion.
There is no way that this court is going to issue any type of punishment given the circumstances of this case. And my heart does go out to you. and your family because of what you've gone through.
The reality that Larry Nassar sexually abused close to 300 girls over years has been regarded as a failure of society. This case has inevitably led to investigations, but more importantly, it's forced the nation to take a hard look at how women are treated and valued. Neda Tawfiq, BBC News, New York.
Let's take a look at some more stories making the news now. And the Pentagon has published a policy document saying the United States should extend its nuclear capabilities. It wants to develop a new low-yield atomic bombs, largely in response to the threat it believes posed by Russia. The Deputy Director of Strategy at the Pentagon denied that the US was entering a new arms race. A report by United Nations monitors says North Korea earned nearly $200 million last year by exporting banned commodities in violation of international sanctions. The leaked report from the UN Security Council said several countries, including China, Russia and Malaysia, had failed to stop the illegal exports. At least 90 people are feared dead in the latest migrant tragedy in the Mediterranean Sea off the coast of Libya. That's according to the UN Migration Agency. Only 3 people are now known to have survived the sinking, which happened early on Friday. The bodies of 10 people have been recovered so far. And French prosecutors have placed the prominent Muslim academic Tariq Ramadan under formal investigation on charges of rape. The Swiss national denies wrongdoing and is suing one of his accusers, Henda Ayari, a former radical Islamist who now heads a secular feminist group. A second woman has claimed she was in 2009. 16 Syrians, including several children, died recently trying to travel across the mountains from Syria into Lebanon. They used a route taken by thousands before them, but were caught in an icy blizzard and froze to death. One of the few to survive was a small girl called Sarah. She's just 3 years old. Our Middle East correspondent Martin Patience has been to meet her.
Meet little Sarah, just 3 years old. The black marks on her face are caused by frostbite. Smugglers abandoned Sarah during a blizzard as she was crossing the mountains from the war in Syria to join her dad. She only survived because the man who dumped her was forced at gunpoint to go back and get her. But Sarah's mum, big sister and granny all froze to death. Now, in a Lebanese hospital, Sarah's dad watches over her day and night.
I'll do my best to be a mother and a father to Sarah. I'll do everything I can to help her get over this. She's all I have now.
16 Syrians died trying to reach safety that day. For the rescuers, it was the worst thing they'd ever seen.
Hello.
Hello.
But there is some good news. A couple of days after first meeting Sarah and her dad, we went to see them again. Sarah's had an operation on her face. She's got her appetite back. Her doctor says the surgery was a success.
So you're hopeful there won't be too much scarring?
Yes, yes. I hope that everything will be good.
That her face will be...
Yes, will be a normal, like a normal baby.
Oh, fantastic. It'll look normal.
Sarah's dad captured her first moment after the operation. She's got a long way to go, but she's still smiling. Martin Patience, BBC News, Lebanon.
The man who drove his van into Muslim worshippers outside a mosque in North London has been sentenced to life with a minimum of 43 years in prison. Darren Osborne killed Makram Ali and injured 12 other people during the attack in Finsbury Park last June. Daniel Sanford has more.
Darren Osborne was seized at the scene of the Finsbury Park attack after van into a group of Muslims trying to kill as many as possible.
Just have a seat up there for us, mate.
Convicted of murder and attempted murder yesterday, his 102 previous convictions for violence, dishonesty and drugs offences were outlined to the court today, as was the devastation caused to the family of Makram Ali, the man he murdered. Outside court, his daughter, with his cheerful wife by her side, spoke of the family's love for him.
He will never be forgotten. He will always stay in our hearts. His laughter will echo the walls of our home. His smile will be reflected in our eyes, and his memory will be alive in our conversations.
Darren Osborne's absurd defence that a man called Dave was driving during the attack was scorned by the judge. Addressing him directly, Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb said, "An intelligent British jury saw through your pathetic last-ditch attempt to deceive them." She then jailed him for life, saying the appropriate minimum term for this terrorist murder is 43 years, which means he can't be released until he's at least 90 years old. The judge drew attention to how Osborne was rapidly radicalised over the internet, how in a matter of a month he'd allowed his mind to be poisoned by those who she said claimed to be leaders, but who were determined to spread hatred of Muslims. Today the judge also chose to praise the imam who protected Osborne after the attack. She said Mohammed Mahmoud had the strength to do the right thing under pressure, to respond to evil with good. Daniel Sanford, BBC News at Woolwich Crown Court.
Stay with us here on BBC News. There's plenty still to come. Viva Forever. After more than 20 years, the Spice Girls appear to confirm they're getting back together. Welcome back. You're watching BBC News, the latest headlines. President Trump says a Republican memo alleging the FBI abused its surveillance powers shows the agency is biased against him. And the father of 3 sexual abuse victims has lunged at the disgraced USA gymnastics team Dr. Larry Nassar during his final sentencing hearing. The Afghan capital, Kabul, has seen 3 large attacks over the past fortnight, with more than 120 people killed. 2 were carried out by the Taliban, 1 by the so-called Islamic State group. Despite controlling less territory than the Taliban, IS has launched more major attacks in Kabul than any other militant group over the past year. IS is growing in influence in Afghanistan just as it's being pushed out of Syria and Iraq. Our correspondent Secunda Kamani was given exclusive access to one jailed IS member in Kabul.
Inside an Afghan prison, a man who was once willing to kill in the name of the Islamic State group.
I took part in fighting and executing people. We used to make people sit on top of bombs and blow them up.
Like many IS fighters in Afghanistan, the detainee we spoke to was previously part of the Taliban. He asked us not to show his face out of fear of reprisals. We interviewed him with members of the security services present.
For the Taliban, if someone from the government repents, he should be forgiven. But IS say he should be killed. IS preach that they are the real Muslims, not the Taliban.
The Islamic State group might only control small pockets of territory in the country, but over the last year they've carried out at least 14 major attacks here in the capital, Kabul. That's significantly more than even the Taliban. IS have repeatedly attacked Kabul's Shia minority. They killed over 40 people at this Shia cultural center in December. This man narrowly escaped with his life.
In the past, Shias living in the countryside used to come to Kabul because it was safer. Now my relatives tell me to leave Kabul because it's become so dangerous here.
In the past 2 weeks, Kabul has been repeatedly attacked by both IS and the Taliban. The groups have fought against each other at times. But officials here claim there's little difference between the two, and that in attacking Kabul, they share the same aims.
Their goal and their objective behind this approach is to provoke people against the government and make them rise against the government. So then the government will fall apart. Huh? And then what happens? Then in Afghanistan we will have a chaos.
But this former IS member says the group is different from the Taliban, and it's more extreme.
They say they will do what Taliban can't do and take over the whole country.
Outside the cultural center attacked by IS, the shoes of the victims remain piled in a heap. Whether it's further attacks by IS or the Taliban, this is a city braced for more bloodshed. Sikandar Kamani, BBC News, Kabul.
The former lead singer of the Motown group The Temptations, Dennis Edwards, has died at the age of 74. He joined the group in 1968 and featured on hits such as Papa Was a Rolling Stone and Ball of Confusion. He left in 1977 only to rejoin them 3 years later. He died in hospital in Chicago a day before his 75th birthday. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones took a steep dive, plummeting more than 660 points. It ranks as the worst day on the markets since Donald Trump took office and comes despite a strong jobs report which showed wage growth. The problem is that reinforced investors' concern about inflation and the bond market. Scientists studying the decline in the survival rates of polar bears expending more energy than they can consume as they hunt. The researchers found that the bears have a higher metabolic rate than previously thought. Victoria Gill has more.
A polar bear's view of the Arctic. These remarkable images were captured by cameras inside tracking collars that scientists fitted to female polar bears. The researchers had to work for 3 Arctic spring seasons, from 2014 to 2016, to capture and collar 9 solitary bears. Each animal wore a collar for around 10 days before the cameras inside were retrieved, revealing these unique insights into their behaviour. The aim was to understand whether the animals were getting enough to eat during the critical spring thaw. Satellite studies have shown Arctic sea ice decreasing at a rate of about 14% every decade, and the bears use that ice to hunt their main and most calorie-rich prey, seals. So as well as fitting them with GPS tracking and camera-containing collars, the researchers injected the bears with a metabolic tracer. This showed that wild bears have a higher metabolic rate than previously thought, and that most of them were unable to catch enough food to meet their energy needs.
So it was really quite fascinating to learn the basic behaviors of these animals and how they're using the sea ice environment. This is in the spring, where temperatures can get down to -20, -30 degrees Celsius. So it's pretty inhospitable. It'd be almost impossible for a researcher to be out on the sea ice in those conditions for an extended period of time. There's very little information that exists on the basic behaviors of these animals on the sea ice. And so the video camera collars actually provide us actual insight into what the bears are doing.
The scientists say this new technology, following their every move and every meal, reveals just how the predators will be affected as their icy environment transforms around them. Victoria Gill, BBC News.
And finally, the Spice Girls appear to have confirmed a reunion of some sort after they met at Jerry Horner's house to discuss reforming. They posted this picture with Emma Bunton, better known as Baby Spice, commenting that the future is looking spicy. It's the first time they've been seen together like this since 2012. The group were, of course, hugely famous in the 90s with their girl power philosophy. They then split in 2000 and performed a 3-month supposedly farewell tour in 2008 and then at the opening ceremony of the London Olympics. This was one superfan's reaction.
If we're going to be completely honest, I broke down in tears. I was literally in the back of my friend's car, I was like, they're back! Because there's been rumours for literally months, years, decades, saying, oh, they're going to get back together, they're going to do something, an anniversary special, another tour. And obviously since the Olympics there's been this massive craze, we need the Spice Girls back. So millions of people still want them. And I think now with especially with the Me Too movement and feminism being the forefront of news and stuff, which is great.
See, we said he was a superfan, didn't we? You're watching BBC News, do stay with us.